I'm going to start with a little bit of a personal story. In 2003, I was fortunate enough to take a ride on the Concorde before it ended service. And at the time, I couldn't really articulate why this was an important thing in my life. I'd always been an aerospace buff. And I never saw the Concorde necessarily as interesting because it was exclusive or because it was expensive, but because it was this object of beauty that was born out of function. And this sort of object of wonder as well, not to mention it really became a symbol of what humanity could accomplish, certainly in a technological way. And this was true for a lot of people, not necessarily just for me. The Concorde holds a special place in people's lives, even if they aren't an airline buff. And essentially, this is what kept it in the air. It certainly wasn't the return on investment, given the money that was spent to put it together and to fly them. It was kept in the air because it was this symbol for people of wonder and accomplishment and what we could sort of accomplish if we coordinated together. And so what was interesting to me about this was that later I realized that this was an object of meaning for me. We've talked a little bit about meaning for the whole day so far. In fact, I'm kind of grateful to the speakers who have already mentioned meaning, because that's really the subject of my talk here. So this, for me, was an object of meaning. And different people have different objects of meaning. This might not have any meaning for you, and that's fine. But this is really one of the things that makes life worth living, not the Concorde specifically, but these things and these experiences in our lives that we connect with because they provide and they express meaning for us. So one of the important questions to understand, we hear in the business press a great deal now about companies need to strive for meaning and individuals need to talk about meaning. And this is all very true. Meaning is incredibly strategic and incredibly important. However, one of the things that most people aren't discussing is how do you use meaning? How do you put it into a development process? How do you make it strategic? And quite frankly, what is meaning? We tend to talk about meaning as something that's important. And meaning is important, but it's not the same thing as important. Moving on, we need to understand how to use meaning. If we ever hope to create deep connections with customers or citizens or friends and loved ones, students in my case very often, until we understand the structure of meaning, how to use it as a tool and a process, we can't hope to create things that are more successful, certainly more meaningful products and services or more meaningful public policy, more meaningful events and experiences, for instance, like this one. We can't do that unless we know what meaning is and we have a way of using it in our lives. So one of the first questions we need to ask ourselves is, what's meaningful to us personally? In fact, we do this already. We understand meaning at a very intuitive level, and that's a really good thing. It's not something that is entirely foreign in our lives. It's not like walking on the moon that we have to do a great deal of preparation for. It means that we're already equipped to understand what meaning is and how to use it once someone lays out what the mechanics of meaning are. One of the problems that a lot of companies have, a lot of organizations, and even some governments have, is that their approach to meaning is, because they don't have a tool set, because they don't have a process, is absolutely haphazard. It's absolutely accidental. And that's fine. We've created meaningful things in our cultures, in our lives, in our societies up until this point, but we've done it accidentally. Understanding what meaning is and how to use it gives us the chance to do it deliberately and to do it strategically. I'm going to ask you to indulge me for a moment in a very quick exercise. If you just close your eyes for a moment and think about a memory, something you experienced in your life that was so meaningful to you that if you had to only choose one memory for the rest of your life, one memory that you've experienced so far that you could carry on with you, that expressed that you were alive or expressed the best about what your life had been. Maybe it was something you accomplished, a connection you made with someone. Maybe it was anything in the world that created a sense of wonder. What would that memory be? And as easy, well, it's actually a fairly difficult question to answer, but you would come to one. You wouldn't maybe be satisfied with the one memory. Nobody should be limited to only one memory in your life. But that process of figuring out what was meaningful to you, that's as easy as meaning is. That's how natural it is for us. when we use it in a professional sense, though, we have to be a little bit more strategic. So meaning isn't the same thing as importance. It's not a scale or spectrum of more meaningful to less meaningful. Meaning is actually a palette of priorities about how we react to the world, how we understand the world, how we create within the world. And these 15 core meanings that we've identified are absolutely universal. Everyone in this room, everyone on this planet understands what these concepts are, maybe with the exception of some very young children. Doesn't matter where you grew up, doesn't matter what media you were exposed to, you have an understanding of what these core meanings are and why they would be important to someone, why they would be important in people's lives. And that's actually a really amazing thing, because it gives us a foundation to create meaning from, create meaning with, in the things that we create, whether they're products and services, whether they're events, whether they're policies, whether they're strategies, it really doesn't matter. So having this universal set is actually really, really quite interesting. So different people, of course, different cultures, they prioritize different meanings. Nobody can sort of prioritize 15 things at once. Some people might prioritize one set of meanings. Another culture, another individual might prioritize a different set of meanings. And what's interesting about this is that once you start understanding which core meanings that people prioritize, you start to understand what they value. Because of course, what we've learned is that our values are constructed out of the priorities of our core meanings and how we express them. And that's a very new way of thinking about values. A lot of companies, especially in the brand world, try to get at customers at a deep sense by talking about their values. But the problem is, if you don't understand your own values, then it shades and biases everything you research and understand about your customers or about citizens, individuals, audiences. And unless you get at that deeper level, which is essentially the building blocks of values, you can't disassociate values from meanings, and therefore it leads you into some wrong conclusions. So values are actually built upon what priorities of meanings we prioritize, and then how we express them. So let me give you a couple quick examples. Security. Everyone in this room understands what security is and why it might be important. We all don't prioritize it necessarily. I don't tend to prioritize these. I would choose another top 3 on this list, because I live in a place where I don't really have to worry about that. But for people who live in places or visit places where safety is important, it's a critical factor, they might prioritize security. It's very similar to people who work in law enforcement or in the military, for instance. They prioritize security, and their expression of security is also very different. They might not feel safe or secure unless they had a gun, a knife, a club, something on them at any moment that they could defend themselves with, or their family, right? They don't feel secure unless they're capable of defending themselves at any moment. Now, my expressions of security is very different than that. I don't feel safe when I'm around a lot of people carrying knives and guns and clubs. But that's my expression of security. I can still have a conversation with someone that has a completely different value set about how to express security, because we can still agree on what it is and why it might be important, even though we may have diametrically opposed views about how to accomplish security in our lives. Another example might be freedom. So in many communities, especially here in Asia, often in Europe, freedom is accomplished by a sense of cooperation and collaboration. We follow rules, we take our turn, we are free from sort of other people's mess by following the rules and collaborating or cooperating with each other. It's probably a big stereotype, it may be an unfair stereotype, but in the US we have a very different expression of freedom. We don't feel free unless we're breaking the rules, because if there's rules and we can't break them, then we're not free, right? So we have very different expressions on a cultural level of freedom, but we could still have a conversation and an understanding that can go into a strategic development process about what freedom is and why it might be important. And that's a little bit about how meanings, core meanings, transcend values. And until we understand this, you can't play at this value game, and you can't play at this meaning game, which means that you can't actually construct experiences and deliverables and offerings, whether they're, again, products, services, policies. You can't have these deep connections form between you and another person, you and a product, your customer and your products, or your customers and your brands, unless you understand this. And the other piece of this is you can't tack it on later. Meaning is very personal. So companies and organizations, governments are usually pretty bad at this because they're very deterministic. They're very opportunistic about how they approach it. Artisans and artists tend to be a lot more successful because they start with the person. They start with a more humanistic approach. They put that at the core of what they create, and then all the sort of design details and technology and implementation flows out of that. Meaning and values are something that you don't get those deep connections until you focus on it. You can't tack it on later with advertising or with market messages. It has to be part of the corporate strategy, the brand strategy, your product strategy, your public policy, if you want it to come out of the energy you put into creating something. So meaning is very personal. It transcends values. It's also something that you can't do as an afterthought. Now, these are 3 domains that have been identified, mostly in the business press, but all over the place, that are driving innovation in our lives today, and are certainly in business today and government today. Design thinking and design processes, systems thinking and sustainability. We just heard a great conversation about, or presentation about why climate change is becoming important strategically to the decisions that we make in public policy, and then of course sort of new business and new approaches to leadership. And in fact, it's getting to the point where it's almost impossible to be successful in business, in government, in these domains, unless we're integrating the needs and the impacts and the requirements and the limitations from all of these 3 things together. Design and innovation, design-led innovation, for instance, is the process for instituting innovation that satisfies sustainability and systems thinking as well as real business needs, et cetera. And I'm here to say that meaning is the thing that anchors all of this together. When you put meaning at the focus of your strategy, it helps you solve all of the rest of these issues. It helps you wrestle with balancing a lot of different needs. And that's because it keeps you focused on the thing that's most important. Keeps you focused on the thing that's going to create the deepest connection between you and your company and your brand or your government and your citizens and customers and audiences, et cetera. That's why it's very strategic. Now, I arrived at this with my colleague Steve Diller because we were working on a book about essentially the business case for experience. And we knew meaning was important, but we didn't have a sense of what it was or how to work with it until out of Steve's research. He's an ethnographic consumer researcher. His research all over the world kept showing alignment around a certain set of phenomena and priorities that kept coming up over and over again, and that's where our core meanings came from. So when we figured this out, we had a model. We realized that this was more important than anything else we were writing, and we flipped the book inside out to reflect this because that became the process for how we expected other people and organizations to do it too. So this is a little bit about what it looks like. When we're out there in the world making choices, the most shallow, the least deep decisions we make are about price and performance. We ask ourselves, and these are very rational questions we might articulate out loud, does this do what I need? Does it have the features that I need? Does it perform the way I need to? Very easy questions to ask. They're fairly easy questions to answer too. The next level of depth of questions we might ask are, does it do it at a price that I'm willing to pay for? I was willing to pay to fly on the Concorde, but I'll tell you, I couldn't do it every day. It's an expensive way to get from point A to point Z. So what's interesting about these 2 questions is that they're very shallow, they don't create deep connections, they're short-lived, they're low value, and they're exactly where business students are taught to focus. This is where businesses focus, price and performance, right? So we've taught people in business how to focus on the least value part of the relationship with customers. And again, outside of a business context, this works for NGOs, it works for governments, it works just within personal relationships. When we get another ring in, a little bit closer, it's all about emotions, and emotions are incredibly powerful and influential. They also are very short-lived. The most emotions are over in a matter of seconds, right? So it's a very powerful thing to play with in creating a solution, but it's also a very volatile one. One step in further, it's all about identity. Is this me? Am I a Coke person or a Pepsi person? Mac, Windows, right? Socialist, communist, capitalist. It's how we identify with things. And these are intimate personal questions. We don't go running around articulating them out loud, but they're happening within our heads all the time, and that's why they're important. When we get to this deeper level, this last level, this core level of meaning, we're really asking ourselves, does this even fit in my world? Would I even use one of these? What do I think about this? And those are the kind of questions that we can focus on because they actually turn universal. So you can focus on core meanings. You do your customer research, your design research around what priorities your customers have and how are they expressing them. And you play these things out not just in product development and service development, but you play them out in corporate strategy as well. The most successful experiences tend to be the most meaningful. And now that we have a tool set and a process that helps us understand this, now we have a way to do this deliberately. We can put this strategically and deliberately into our processes and deliberately create more meaning in the world, more meaningful experiences for people, rather than relying on chance, rather than doing it accidentally. So some of the questions that we need to be asking ourselves around this, this is absolutely natural. We're already doing this in our lives, we're just not aware of it. Now we have a tool set to be more, not just deliberate, but more aware and, it's another word I can't think of right now, cognizant of doing this in a successful way. In addition, I'm going to ask you this question again. How we answer this question with this, within this understanding changes what we focus on. It changes what we determine as meaningful in our lives. And that's a really good thing to be asking yourselves fairly often anyway, because this is what makes life living. The things that you find meaningful, the deep connections you make with things or places or especially people, those are the things that enhance our lives on a very deep level, on a meaningful level. Excuse me. The last thing that I'll say is that it's important to ask, it's even more important, in fact, to be concerned with what those around you find meaningful. This isn't just about us, both in a personal context and in a professional context. What we need to do in order to create meaningful experiences for other people is to understand what they find meaningful and to figure out in our research tools how to get at that and then how to put that into the development process, how to innovate around meaning, because it's longer lasting and it's higher value and it's a better innovation strategy than looking at price and performance. It's also less maddening. So the last thing I'll leave you with is that my hope for the future is that we all decide to create meaningful experiences for ourselves, for our communities, for our societies, for our customers, for our students in my case, for our citizens, that we decide to create more meaningful experiences in the world, because that's what will make life more worth living. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan.